Hello and welcome. I have complex and profound feelings of affection and protection for Canterbury Cathedral. I grew up in her shadow during my teenage years, and having been sent to the cathedral school that surrounds her, she became part of the framework of my life as a young man. For 5 years I lived beside her and around her, and indeed sometimes within her. And as I explored her almost daily, sometimes she was a shortcut between classrooms, a relationship between us developed like a person. She had different aspects to her character. Parts of her were easy access, other parts of her were intense and complex. The intense and complex places were where the scent of holiness had grown thick and the atmospheric pressure somehow a bit more intense. And I was seduced first, perhaps, by the music. As a choral scholar, I had to sing in liturgies I wouldn't otherwise have bothered with as a teenager. But in the depths of the crypt, after battling through the darkness of early morning fog before dawn as it swirled through the cloisters and under the buttresses, I found myself singing mysterious, haunting plainsong as part of the most exquisite liturgy, while the Eucharist was celebrated by an Anglican minister at an ancient stone Catholic altar. The candlelit darkness was full of presence, and somehow the music acted as a key that opened the pores of my curious adolescent soul. It didn't occur to ask myself if I believed or not, for God was quite obviously present. The place was infused in him and by him. Stone soaked in prayer had become soft like a sponge and irradiated the presence of God with prayers and the adoration of the past into the present. It was T.S. Eliot who mused on the perichoresis of time, the interpenetration of time and space, the present and the past, in some mysterious way, the past seeping deeply into the present there. In the crypt one Sunday evening, I first met the Mother of God, Mary, the Mother of our Lord, Theotokos, as a clergyman talked surprisingly effectively about her in his sermon. He described the quality of sacrificial love which keeps faith in the face of pain and dereliction, expressed as Mary kept watch at the foot of the cross where her son was being executed as he carried the sins and paid the price for the flaws of the whole of humanity. I understood something of that, and I found myself scribbling on a piece of paper in response something like a haiku poem, which I've never forgotten. It emerged from my heart, even if my head was travelling quite a long way behind and would take years to catch up. I wrote, "If ever I am to love or be loved, then let there be a cross with a foot to be filled." And so began the seeds of longing for Our Lady, admiration and affection that only broke surface properly when decades later I was received into the Catholic Church, the church that had conceived and built and sustained that cathedral until the state takeover at the Reformation, better known as the Defamation. My life was like the cathedrals in reverse. I had begun as an Anglican and I had to journey back to the foundations of the faith, reversing the flow of national history and time, to put things back in order where faith had gone wrong. The nave, the western part of the building, was more diffuse atmospherically than the mysterious womb of the crypt or the choir of the high altar. But one night in near total darkness, right at the west end, lit only by a solitary line of candles, we sang the ever-glorious Advent responsory by Palestrina. Something in the ecstatic longing of this piece, carried upwards by an exquisite polyphony that melted the heart, gave fresh wings to my soul. I never knew until then how much my soul was in a state of longing for God, until this Advent responsory carried it heavenwards into the luminous dark. Just beyond the nave, St. Thomas Becket was murdered in the northwestern transept. A small corner by the little door into the cloisters that the monks thought to bar to keep the assassins out, until the Archbishop was struck down by thuggish Jobsworths on the make, trying to impress the king. Who knew the Archbishop had clothed himself secretly in a hair shirt worn under his formal clothes until his body lay prone on those same flagstones, soaked in blood, and it was exposed as the monks tried to care for his corpse. Recognizing him as I did for a brave man, a man brave enough to put conscience before abusive authority, I would from time to time sit on a stone ledge beside where he'd been struck down, contemplating a would-be friendship with him. He became an odd but real friend in my adolescence. I was practicing what Catholics understand as the communion of saints, talking to those who are closer to Jesus now than they were in the flesh. I too was often to encounter, as many of us do, what I took to be abusive authority, then and beyond. In the windows above where he fell are to be found remembrances of some of the 703 attested miracles that took place as pilgrims came to his shrine on their knees in prayer, kneeling on those stones. Over the centuries before the Protestant Vandals, not for the last time mistaking the meaning of the place, ravaged his shrine, the cathedral had seen an endless line of suffering pilgrims walk, stumble and crawl over those flagstones, begging God for healing through the prayers of St. Thomas Becket. And the healings came at least 703 times, and undoubtedly more. Petronella, for example, the desperate nun whose life was completely crippled by epilepsy until she was healed by the prayers of St. Thomas and the love of God at the shrine. Henry of Fordwich, I used to row in Fordwich and cycle down there, where Henry lived in the Middle Ages. He was off his head with violent madness, and he was forced to live with his hands tied behind his back by his neighbours with rope and sticks, until cured at the shrine after spending the night in prayer there with St. Thomas over his bones. In his right mind, he left the sticks and the ropes at the tomb, the ones that had been used to restrain him from wounding himself in the past. Every stone on that floor carried the weight of streams of desperate people, both the questing, suffering, but equally those who walked away healed and infused with joy at the miraculous answer to their prayers. But today the cathedral needs money. The new dean, the very Reverend Dr. David Monteith, says he wants to reach out to the younger people, as well as finding ways of raising the large sums the cathedral requires to survive. He scratched his head and decided that the stones under his feet might be put to a different use than worship and pilgrimage. He's opting instead for dancing, accompanied by booze, rave music, and very sexy lyrics. He wants to draw the young into the cathedral, both the young and their money. The dean knows what he wants to do with their money, but he's not quite so clear what he wants them to get out of their entrance into this sacred space. So the rave in the Nave will take place over 2 nights in February 2024. It will be a strictly 18+ event, and it will feature lots of alcohol and the music of the 1990s, Britney Spears, the Spice Girls, Eminem and the Venga Boys. Dr. Monteith hasn't been clear about how he intends to preserve the sacredness of the place while flogging the ravers' booze and entertainment in the form of throbbing noise in their high-powered headphones, raw, sexy lyrics, and the self-expressive jiggling that comes in the form of drunken dancing. Indeed, he doesn't seem overly bothered by the gap between the holiness of the sacred space he was appointed to care for and the drunken Epicurean pursuit of mind-numbing, hypersexualized pleasure. Not surprisingly, some people have felt critical of this. Ashenden Scripted, who is a doctor in Sussex, has written an excoriating article, for example, in the European Conservative, reminding some of his readers of the lyrics that entertain silent discos dancers through their high-tech headphones. Let me read some of it to you. He writes, "Profound exhortations such as the real Slim Shady's 'My bum is on your lips. If I'm lucky, you might give it a little kiss,' as well as his theological musings that if we can hump dead animals and antelopes, then there's no reason why one man and another man can't elope." These lyrics will be beamed into the headphones of intoxicated ravers whilst they contemplate the ancient architecture and 14 centuries of Christian history that they've stumbled into in pursuit of a good time. Will there be a life-changing experience? The Dean's not sure. Some might well accuse Dr. Monteith of really poor judgment and wonder how such a man came to occupy such a dignified and responsible position as Dean of the Mother Church of the Anglicans. But perhaps the situation says more about English Anglicanism than anything personally about the current Dean of Canterbury, because entertainment seems to have become, if not a religion for Anglican cathedral deans, then, well, at any rate, an alternative to practicing their religion. They've taken these medieval Catholic shrines that the state grabbed in a putsch at the defamation, and not content or even aware of the presence of God, they've abandoned a pursuit of the sacred for a push for populist, secular entertainment. In other cathedrals, this has taken the form of indoor golf courses, helter-skelters, the installation of gin distilleries into buildings, and also adult film clubs. Well-meaning people hoping to save the cathedral from impending desecration have started a petition begging for the Archbishop of Canterbury to intervene. Sadly, because of how the Church of England does episcopacy, Justin Welby has neither the power nor the influence, and nor, from his silence, the willingness to intervene within the church where he sits on the throne of St. Augustine and where he was consecrated. It's not a new trope, but on the other hand, I'm not sure it's been bettered. But those of us who've been pilgrims there and for whom love, longing and prayer were birthed and nurtured are tempted to offer a different solution to the Anglicans. Perhaps if the C of E doesn't know what cathedrals are for anymore, they might consider returning them to the people who built them, the Catholics who do.